on this show. It's a real possibility since about 2 months ago. So that's when we started talking about it. All right.
And along those lines, let's bring on our first guest today, as we are pleased to be joined by Kevin Sweeney, college basketball writer for Sports Illustrated. Kevin, great to have you on. How you doing today?
I'm good, guys. Appreciate you having me.
All right, so you wrote a recent hot seat article, and Adrian Autry, of course, was on it. And, as everybody knows in this town, it feels inevitable that change is coming. What do you make of the Adrian Autry era here, and why do you think it didn't work out?
Look, I think following Boeheim was going to be incredibly challenging in a lot of respects, right? Modernizing the program with him still sort of existing in the shadows in some form or fashion, changing things but not completely overhauling. I think it was always going to be hard. I think when you look back, some real failures in roster management and talent evaluation that were critical. Given more resources this year, it hasn't changed the results substantially enough, and I think that at its core is where it's fallen short.
Yeah, and along those lines, everyone around here thought that they had enough talent and that they upped the NIL game enough this year to make the tournament. John Wildhack, the AD here, had said, the expectation is meaningful games in March, and unfortunately they weren't playing meaningful games in February. So what has surprised you the most about, I guess, this year's team in particular from a national lens? From the outside looking in, did it feel like Syracuse was going to get back in the tournament this year? And I guess what went wrong this year in particular?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was bullish on them in the preseason. I think I had them a little bit higher than the 77th that KenPom has them now, but it was definitely a little bit lower than tournament for them. I've never been a huge Donnie Freeman guy. I think Starling obviously has had his ups and downs in his college career, but also someone I probably wasn't all in on. But at its core, right, like Syracuse made a heavy investment in Nate George, and Nate George has not fundamentally changed them offensively or as a team, and where a big spend point guard needs to be. So I think that is the point you will look back on as the miss that maybe cost Red his job.
There are a few names that keep popping up in connection with this job here in town. Curious, who are some of the names that you would go after if and when this job opens?
Look, I think every school in the market will take a swing at Josh Schertz. Syracuse certainly among them. I think Josh Schertz is a phenomenal coach. I think he's got like the temperament and personality to energize a fan base that needs it, but also the X's and O's skill that few can match. I do think it's going to be hard to get him to leave St. Louis, especially for a job. But at its core, I think Josh Schertz wants a job he can win a national championship at. And it is incumbent on whoever is presenting the job, given the administrative uncertainty at Syracuse, to present that vision of why Syracuse is a championship caliber place. I think once you get past him, obviously Bryan Hodgson with the regional connection without being in the family hire. And if you work your way down past him, then things get really interesting. And there's a ton of mid-major names you could look at. There's a ton of, I think in this era, NBA guys and things of that nature. But I do think that those are the two names that you will hear most regularly with this job until at least those two are off the board.
What about Mike Hopkins? Have you heard that name pop up, and would you consider him?
It comes up obviously just because of the connections. It's not an avenue I would go. I thought he struggled down the stretch at Washington very substantially, and I think Washington is a job that has all the resources to be successful. He really struggled with NIL, not raising it. They had all the money they needed, but spending it the right way. And so I'd be very reticent. Obviously, it's all about fit, and he fits Syracuse in a lot of ways. But if I was going back to the family, quote unquote, I would be more intrigued by Gerry McNamara and the job he's doing at Siena than I would be in Mike Hopkins.
All right, interesting. You bring up Gerry. Folks here seem to be kind of divided on him, saying that it's too early. He's only been there 2 years. It's just Siena. What would you? It sounds like you're a little bit more of a fan of that hire than you would be Mike Hopkins. What are your thoughts on Gerry?
Yeah, I mean, Joe, I'm a Siena guy. I got a 518 area code for those familiar. So I'm very familiar with Gerry McNamara's work. Look, I wouldn't disagree with anything you said. It is early. He does have a lot to prove, but he has done a really nice job. He's proven he can recruit at a very high level at Siena. He's proven that at Syracuse as well. He understands the place. And I think he's someone who is continuing to grow and is on an upward trajectory, right? Maybe it is an early swing for where Syracuse is, and there's a level of safety that they need with this hire. But I think if you value the family and the connections, I do think he's someone who has a lot of potential in this business and is worth investing in, given he understands the place as well as he does.
All right, let's circle back to Bryan Hodgson. You touched on him briefly, but he's another name that keeps coming up quite often in connection with this job, and a lot of folks here locally would be very excited if he were to be the next head coach here. What can you tell us about Bryan Hodgson?
Yeah, he's a monster recruiter. Was one of the best in the country as an assistant in that regard. We'll always have high-level players. Did it at Arkansas State once he became the head coach, continued that into his time, obviously, at South Florida, where they have a really good team. I think the question, in a lot of respects, when he got Arkansas State was, like, what was he as a coach? He was pigeonholed in a lot of regards from a perception standpoint as just a recruiter, and he's proven that he can get guys to play really hard. He can build a winning system. So I think that all should excite you. I think it's still early. I like guys who've been to the NCAA tournament. I like guys who've, won at a very high level and built a real resume. But, I understand a hot name, not just for Syracuse, but also for a handful of other high majors. And what he's done this year at USF has been very impressive.
Kansas State's already open. I think that, there are several other Power 4 jobs that we expect to come open. Oklahoma, Arizona State, maybe LSU. What are some places that we should be keeping our eye out to see if there is an opening? Who's, I guess, high on that hot seat list for you?
Yeah, you mentioned a handful of them. I do think the ACC will be an active carousel with Pittsburgh, potentially, with Boston College. Providence and Syracuse could have some similar names in common in terms of guys that they look to. So I'd keep an eye on that job. Cincinnati as well. And then the big job that I think people will highlight, and obviously there's some retirements that could swing things as well, but the big job to watch is Ohio State. Whether they want to move on from Jake Diebler, they're right on the bubble right now. If they miss the tournament, how much does pressure intensify? And if they make a move, they become the best job in the market, and how that changes with the ripple effect of that would be fascinating.
If any of these schools open or a bigger school opens due to a retirement and Hodgson is this hot name, can Syracuse compete with those schools in order to get the up-and-coming coach that they want?
Yeah, obviously Hodgson's a little different because of his connection to the area. That should help in Syracuse's pursuit. But, look, I think there's a lot of questions around the industry about what the Syracuse job is, right? It's so, is it a Jim Boeheim job or is it a Syracuse job? And that's impactful, right? And so because especially with the administrative uncertainty, what do the resources look like? What is the vision for the place when I walk in there on my first day? What does my boss want it to look like? I think all of those are very real questions. I think people really value the fan base and the tradition and the history, and I think that can help it stand alone among some of the other jobs that are on the market. It's not a great cycle of jobs, quite frankly. It's a lot of mid and lower tier power conference gigs. But at the same time, there's a lot of uncertainty, and Syracuse is falling behind in a lot of regards from a financial standpoint, and they will have to, and it's not just NIL, right? It's coach salaries, it's staff pool, it's everything that goes into it that I think, coaches and their agents will be very keen on hearing about if and when Syracuse obviously enters the market officially.
All right, so just to follow up on that, I know recently the Field of 68 conducted an anonymous poll about where Syracuse is in terms of best jobs in the ACC, and they slotted in at 6th in that poll in the conference. Does that sound a little high for you based on what you're saying?
I don't know if I would say high, right? Again, I think outside of the top tier, it's very much a beauty in the eye of the beholder situation, right? Some people would love a job like SMU, where there's not a lot of pressure and a lot of money. right? And some people would love a place like Syracuse where people really, really care, but you may have to build up some of the infrastructure and reestablish what the program is, while dealing with expectations of not just making the NCAA tournament, but hopefully advancing, moving deep, competing for conference championships, things of that nature. So I think it's a scary job for some people. It's also a challenge that a lot of people would relish as well. So I think 60 is fair.
Big picture stuff here. Duke just came up with a massive win over Michigan. They're the new number one in the nation. Who's your pick to win it all right now? Is it Duke or is it somebody else?
I think I would still take Michigan. Duke certainly is really, really good. I think Illinois is really good. Arizona's really good. Florida. But I think Michigan at its best is the best team in the country. The size, the physicality, the speed, but Duke showed that if you can keep them out of transition and force them to play in the half court, that they have their flaws. And that will be the model that everyone else tries to replicate against the Wolverines. It's just easier said than done.
I know you covered the NBA draft closely as well. This Darren Peterson saga is just fascinating. Watching this kind of unfold and play out from afar. What do you make of that whole dynamic between him and his teammates and his coach Bill Self? And is what's kind of playing out before our eyes? Is that going to affect his draft stock at all, or is he going number one no matter what?
I wouldn't say number one no matter what. Obviously AJ is an incredible prospect, and Cambu's not far behind. But I do think he's the clear favorite. And I think a lot of the narrative that has taken off here over the last couple of weeks is wholly unfair to who Darren Peterson is, the intel that people have gathered who've been around him for multiple years, who've talked to people at every stage of his journey. Darren Peterson's a competitive kid. He really wants to compete. He really wants to win. If he didn't want to play, he wouldn't be playing right now. He would have shut it down and he'd be the number one pick. He is hurting his draft stock by playing games while he is not clearly not healthy and clearly not himself. And if I understand that it's incredible. It's an incredible talking point. It's taken off on the internet, but it is. I can't imagine how frustrating it would be for someone like Darren in that spot to continue to see some of that commentary that's gone crazy. And again, it's now reached a point of a no-win situation for him, where when he plays, he's criticized for X, Y, and Z. When he doesn't play, he's criticized for X, Y, and Z. When he goes and talks to the media, he's criticized for what he says. But when he turns around and doesn't talk to the media, they say, "Why is Darren Peterson hiding?" Right? So it's obviously a unique story, and the only way he can silence some of the criticism is to continue to play. And he's played the last 2 games fully. I expect him to do that, assuming he can stay healthy down the stretch as well. But he's a special prospect, and we haven't seen the best version of Darren Peterson in college basketball. You watch his high school tape. You watch some of the early stuff at Kansas before the injuries really set in. There's a level of explosion he's missing right now.
Yeah, really good insight there. I've got one more for you. We were talking about this the other day, and we saw Syracuse play on Big Monday a couple of times, and they had a quick turnaround. They were down 36 to North Carolina before making it close late. They get blown out at Duke. We saw last night, Houston has that quick turnaround. They get blown out at Kansas. Louisville with the quick turnaround, blown out, and then made a run late to make it interesting against North Carolina. Is there anything to that? The Big Monday going from Saturday to Monday and the road team being at a supreme disadvantage?
Yeah, I think it's a fair criticism and it's a fair challenge, right? Obviously, college basketball teams are not used to one-day preps, especially off of, depending on what time you play Saturday and, kind of getting your body right in a very short time window and then turning around and traveling that next day. It's really difficult. So, there's something to it. Obviously, the TV overlords pay the bills and maybe people can't complain too much about it in the grand scheme, but those are the type of scheduling losses, if you will, that do impact the conference races and whatnot down the stretch.
All right, Kevin, great stuff. We really appreciate you coming on and appreciate the information. Hopefully we can do it again down the road.
Let's do it, guys. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. Kevin Sweeney, college basketball writer for Sports